The smirk hit me first, not the kind you see in recruitment posters, sharp-jawed heroes and polished teeth. This was a smirk that said she'd already won an argument you didn't know you were having. A smirk that belonged on a throne, not on a crowded transit concourse that smelled like ozone, engine coolant, and 1,000 different species pretending they weren't tired. She leaned closer, letting the station lights paint silver along the edge of her cheekbones. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. I should have walked away. That's what the sensible part of my brain said, the part trained by years of being the only human in a room full of strangers with sharper claws and longer memories. The part that remembered that arrogance was often a prelude to trouble. But something about her tone made it sound less like a threat and more like a test. I looked her up and down, slow and obvious. Not because I was trying to be rude, because frankly, on a station like Carthage Gate, rudeness was background radiation. She wore a plain travel cloak, dark and unadorned, as if she'd pulled it from any vendor stall. No jeweled sigils, no house colors, no escort drones hovering at shoulder height. She could have been a merchant with too much confidence or a noble slumming it for a thrill. But her posture didn't fit either. She sat like the bench belonged to her. The bench was bolted to the floor. "I'm going to guess," I said, "you're not here to buy discounted engine parts." Her smirk widened just enough to show she was amused. She crossed one leg over the other with a kind of deliberate grace that made a nearby couple of dockworkers glance over and then suddenly remember something fascinating about their boots. "Wrong," she said. "I am here for something very specific." "Let me guess," I replied. "Validation?" She laughed. It wasn't a giggle or a tinkling sound like the vids always used for alien women. It was real, low, warm, a laugh that made the air around her feel less like recycled station breath and more like dangerous sunlight. "Human," she said, tasting the word like it was new. "You're bolder than the reports claim." I went still. Reports. 100 tiny instincts woke up all at once, like a pack of dogs hearing a gate unlatch. I kept my expression bored. I'd learned that boredom was armor. People expected fear. They were disarmed by indifference. "Reports," I echoed like it was a joke. "Lady, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not even important enough to have a parking citation on record." "Oh, you have records," she said, watching me like she could see through my skin to the scars underneath. "You have a file thick enough to stop a rail slug." That wasn't possible. I was a discharged contract security tech, one human among millions drifting between stations, doing work nobody else wanted. Patch a hull seam, fix a comm relay, install a reactor baffle, shoot at pirates when the pay was high enough and the odds weren't stupid. Which fine, sometimes they were stupid. She tilted her head. Her eyes were wrong, not in the horror sense, in the biological sense. They were a deep, shifting color that reminded me of storm clouds seen through blue glass. Pupils narrow like a cat's, but the iris carried flecks that glimmered like distant stars. And she blinked. A translucent inner lid flashed for a fraction of a second. Definitely not human, definitely not common either. "All right," I said, keeping my voice light. "I'll play. Who are you?" She leaned back as if settling in to enjoy a show. "No," she said. "You answer first. Do you know who I am?" I stared at her for a long second, then sighed and rubbed a hand over my face. "You want honesty?" I asked. She nodded. "I don't know who you are," I said, "but I do know what you are." Her brow arched. "And what is that?" "Trouble," I said. She looked delighted. "Good," she said softly. "At least you're not lying to flatter me." That should have been my cue to leave. Trouble was contagious. Trouble got you killed or arrested or indebted to someone who smiled too much. I stood, hooking my tool satchel higher on my shoulder. "Enjoy your trouble," I said. "I've got a job in a ship that barely holds atmosphere." "Sit," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't even impolite. It was certain. The word hit my nervous system like a gravity shift. My knees bent before my brain finished arguing. I sat back down, hard, eyes narrowing. Her smile turned razor thin. "Better," she said. "I didn't like being controlled. Didn't matter if it was tech or pheromones or some weird vocal resonance trick. I hated it." I clenched my jaw. "What do you want?" She let the silence stretch until the station announcements blurred into meaningless syllables. Somewhere behind us, a freight loader hissed and clanked. A group of travelers pushed past, their luggage bots bumping my boot. Then she said, "Tell me what you see." I blinked. "What?" She gestured subtly around us. "This station, these beings, the way they move around each other like schools of fish avoiding predators, the way they pretend not to notice what they fear." "Lady," I said, "I'm not your philosopher." Her gaze didn't waver. "Humans are always philosophers. You simply pretend you aren't because your species finds honesty inconvenient." I let out a humorless laugh. "You've read a lot of human books." I've read enough, she said. Now answer. I exhaled, watching the crowd. A tall, armored alien with bone ridges along its shoulders shoved past a smaller one without apology. The smaller one bowed its head and moved aside. A merchant shouted at a child in a language full of clicks and trills. Two station security drones hovered near a group of migrants, scanning them with an attention that looked a lot like suspicion. What do I see? I said slowly, I see 1,000 species pretending they're civilized while they measure each other by teeth and titles. Her eyes glittered. And humans, she asked. I snorted. Humans aren't special, we just hide our teeth better. Is that what you believe, she asked. There was genuine curiosity there, like the answer mattered. I hesitated. No, I admitted. Humans are special, not because we're stronger, not because we live longer, we don't. We're fragile, we break, we bleed, we die. But we keep showing up anyway. Her smirk softened into something else, something that, for a heartbeat, looked like relief. Good, she murmured, you still remember. Remember what? I asked. She reached into her cloak. My muscles tensed automatically. I wasn't armed station rules, but my hands were fast and my tool satchel held more than tools. She pulled out a small object and held it between two fingers. A coin, not a currency token, those were mostly digital. This was an actual physical coin, worn smooth at the edges. One side bore a human symbol, a stylized ship in flight. The other side had scratches in a pattern that made my throat tighten. 3 claw marks, I knew those marks. The memory hit like a door slamming open. Smoke, screams, the taste of copper in my mouth. A corridor lit by emergency strips. An alien child crying in a language I didn't understand. My hands shaking as I tried to cut through a jammed hatch while plasma fire chewed the walls behind me. And in the middle of it her, not dressed like this. Not calm, bleeding, furious, terrified. A young alien woman with those same storm glass eyes curled over a fallen guard, gripping a blade too big for her hands. Her face had been smeared with ash, her lips split. And yet she'd looked at me like she expected me to kneel. I hadn't. I'd grabbed her by the wrist, dragged her into a service duct, and said the first thing that came to mind. Breathe. If you don't breathe, you die, and I'm not dragging your corpse. Her eyes had snapped to mine wild, then she'd breathed, then we'd run. The station concourse snapped back into focus. The coin sat between her fingers like a dare. My voice came out rougher than I wanted. Where did you get that? She turned it over, letting the claw marks catch the light. You gave it to me, she said. You didn't remember? I swallowed. That was years ago. I was on the rim. I was in a contract unit. We got hit. You pulled me through a burning corridor, she said, cutting through my stammer with calm precision. You broke a door with your bare hands. You carried an injured child on your back while bleeding from a wound you refused to acknowledge. You told me to breathe. My pulse hammered. I didn't know who you were, I said, because suddenly that mattered more than anything. I thought you were just someone caught in it. Her eyes held mine. Yes, she said, that is what I was. The words were simple, but they landed heavy. I leaned back, scanning her cloak, her lack of escort, the way the crowd unconsciously gave her space without understanding why. My brain ran through possibilities like a checklist. Noble, diplomat, intelligence officer, cult leader, something worse. Then my gaze fell to her hands. They were bare, no rings. But the skin at the base of her fingers showed faint lines, like jewelry had been worn for a very long time and recently removed. I'd seen that before on officers who took off their insignia to walk among soldiers. Why are you here? I asked quietly. She didn't answer at first. Instead, she slipped the coin back into her cloak like it was sacred. Then she said, because I am tired of being worshipped by people who fear me. I let out a slow breath. So you came to a station full of smugglers and mercenaries and debt collectors. Her smile returned sharp again. Exactly, she said. No one worships here, they only bargain. That's one word for it, I muttered. She leaned in. I came because I needed someone who would look at me and see a person before a title. My stomach sank. I don't like where this is going. You rarely do, she said, yet you go anyway. I narrowed my eyes. How do you know that? Her gaze flicked to the faint scar under my jaw. Because you are here, because humans always walk into fire if someone is trapped inside. That was dangerously close to admiration, and admiration from someone like her was just another kind of trap. I stood again, forcing my legs to cooperate this time. I can't help you, I said. Whatever your problem is, it's above my pay grade. A flicker, just a flicker of something cold crossed her eyes. Sit, she said again. The command hit like gravity. My knees started to fold. I snarled and slammed my palm down onto the bench, pain shooting up my arm. The sharp sting jolted my nervous system just enough for me to stay standing. I glared at her. The coldness vanished. Her face went still. Well, she said softly, that's new. What the hell are you? I hissed. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed as if something inside her loosened. My people call it the voice, she said. A resonance, a genetic inheritance, a tool for leadership. It compels obedience in those who have not trained against it. And you just use it, I demanded. It is expected, she said quietly. A ruler without authority is a corpse waiting politely. The word ruler made my blood go colder than station air. I laughed once harsh. No, her gaze held mine like a blade held to a throat. Yes, she said. I took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of the cameras, the drones, the crowd. No one was looking directly at us, but I could feel attention sliding like a shadow. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in the air, the subtle tightening of the crowd's movement like a school of fish sensing a predator. Her head turned a fraction, so did mine. Three figures moved through the concourse with purpose. Their clothes were ordinary, their faces covered by breathing masks, but their gait was too synchronized. Their hands stayed close to their coats. Weapons. Assassins didn't look like assassins when they wanted to succeed. They looked like commuters. The woman beside me didn't move, she only smiled. Now, she murmured, you see why I came without an escort. My mouth went dry. You brought them here. I drew them, she corrected. If they strike here, they reveal themselves. And kill you in the process, I snapped. Her eyes flashed. If I die standing. That was the most royal thing she'd said so far. The three figures were close now, too close. I reached into my tool satchel with one hand, fingers closing around the shock driver I used to test current flow. It wasn't a weapon, it could be. The first assassin broke into a run, everything happened at once. A flash of metal, the hiss of a blade unsheathing, a faint whine, the sound of a compact energy pistol charging. The crowd screamed and scattered, panic blooming like a firestorm. I moved before I thought. I grabbed her cloak and yanked her backward off the bench hard. We hit the floor rolling. A bolt of blue energy scorched the air where her head had been. Human, she snarled, more furious than frightened. Breathe, I growled back, dragging her behind the bench as cover. If you don't breathe, I know, she snapped, then froze because she recognized the words. The second assassin vaulted over the bench, blade raised. I jammed the shock driver into his thigh and pulled the trigger. Electric current snapped through him. He convulsed, dropping like a puppet with cut strings. The first assassin fired again. The bolt struck the bench, blowing out a chunk of composite. Shrapnel sliced my cheek. Warm blood ran down my face. The third one came from the side, fast, aiming for her. She moved like she'd been trained since birth for violence. Her hand shot out, fingers splayed, and she spoke one word, not loud, not shouted. It hit the air like a hammer. The assassin froze mid-stride, eyes widening behind his mask, his body locked, obeying despite his will. The voice. She rose to her knees, storm glass eyes blazing. Kneel, she said. The assassin dropped to his knees with a thud, weapon clattering from numb fingers. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the first assassin swore, switching tactics. He didn't aim at her this time. He aimed at me. I saw it, the barrel turning, the wine rising. Time slowed into fragments. I could have moved, maybe, but my body had already chosen. I shoved her sideways. The bolt hit my shoulder. Pain exploded like a star going supernova. My arm went numb. I tasted metal. The floor rushed up as my legs betrayed me. I hit hard, vision flickering. The crowd's screams sounded distant now, muffled like I was underwater. I felt her hands on me immediately, stronger than they looked. Human, she said, and there was something raw in it. I blinked up at her. Still don't know who you are, I rasped. Her mouth twisted, half smirk, half grief. You do, she said. You simply refuse to accept it. I tried to focus. The assassins were still there, one stunned, one kneeling, one still armed. The first assassin was moving, trying to get a clear shot around the bench. Station security drones finally responded, but they were slow, programmed to avoid collateral damage, to negotiate, to escalate properly. There wasn't time for proper. I reached weakly for my satchel with my good hand. My fingers found the emergency foam canister used to seal hull breaches. Highly pressurized, sticky as sin, I yanked it out, thumbed the trigger, and sprayed. A white torrent slammed into the assassin's face and chest, coating his mask and weapon. He staggered, blinded, arms flailing. He fired blindly. The bolt went wide, striking a sign that exploded into sparks. Then a drone slammed into him, pinning him with a crackle of stun arcs. The immediate threat ended in a mess of smoke and chaos. I lay there, breathing in short, sharp gasps. My shoulder burned like someone had poured molten glass into it. The alien woman stared down at me, cloak gone, hair slightly disheveled. Under the plain fabric, I saw the hint of an underlayer, something armored, something expensive. A concealed blade at her side, she was not a traveler. She was a storm pretending to be rain. Drones descended, scanning. A pair of station medics rushed in, one of them a reptilian species with an antiseptic kit clutched in clawed hands. Another was a floating drone with medical arms. And then, like the air itself changed, the crowd went silent. Not because the danger was gone, because something else arrived. A formation of figures stepped into the concourse as if they owned the station. They wore armor that wasn't station-issued, sleek, dark, inlaid with lines that glowed faintly. Their helmets were open-faced, revealing expressions carved from discipline and fear. Royal Guard. Every being in the concourse, dockworkers, merchants, travelers, instinctively backed away, heads lowering. The guard moved with precision, forming a protective ring around her. One of them, taller than the rest, dropped to one knee. "My queen," he said, voice reverent, "forgive our delay." The word hit the concourse like a shockwave. "Queen." I lay on my back, bleeding and half numb, and laughed, a small, broken sound. Of course she was. She sat on a bolted bench like it was a throne, because in her mind, everything was a throne if she decided it was. The taller guard turned his gaze to me. His eyes were hard. "Human," he said like it was an insult. "You touched her." I tried to lift my head. Pain made the world shimmer. "Yeah," I rasped. "Saved her too, twice now. You're welcome." The guard's hand went to his weapon. The queen's voice cut through the moment like a blade through silk. "Stop," she said, not loud, not shouted. But the air vibrated with authority, and the guard froze instantly, hands still on his weapon. She rose fully, shoulders back, chin lifted. She didn't need a crown. The station itself seemed to recognize her. She looked down at me, storm glass eyes softer now. "I asked you if you knew who I was," she said. I coughed, tasting blood. "Yeah," I whispered, "I know now." "And what am I?" she asked quietly. I stared up at her. It would have been easy to say it, to call her majesty, to bow with the rest, to acknowledge the power that made people kneel, but my pride was stubborn and my species had never been good at worship. "You're the woman," I said, "from that corridor, the one who bled and still tried to stand." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, then something like gratitude. The guard leader looked scandalized. The queen didn't. She crouched beside me, ignoring the way her guards tensed. The medics hesitated, unsure whether to touch me in the presence of royalty. She reached out and brushed her fingers against my cheek, wiping away blood with a gentle motion that felt almost absurd in the middle of chaos. "You should have died," she murmured. "Yeah," I said, voice cracking. "I get that a lot." Her lips curved. "Humans are infuriating." "You keep telling me," I said. She studied my shoulder, the scorched fabric, the charred skin beneath. Her eyes hardened, not at me, at the universe. Then she looked up at her guard. "Secure the assassins," she commanded. "Seal this station sector, no one leaves without being scanned, and bring my physician." The guard leader bowed deeply. "At once, my queen." As they moved, she stayed with me. The med drone hovered closer, but she lifted a hand slightly and it paused, waiting. I swallowed, throat dry. "So what now?" I managed. She looked at me like the question was far bigger than the moment. "Now," she said, "I finish what I began." "And what's that?" I asked. Gaze flicked across the concourse, the scattered crowd, the frightened faces, the way beings watched her with reverence and terror. "I came here to prove something," she said softly, "to myself, to my court, to my enemies." "What?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. She leaned closer, voice low enough that only I could hear over the crackle of drones. "That power without humanity is a dead star," she said, "bright but empty." I frowned. "That sounds like something you'd put on a monument." Her smile returned, but it was tired now. "It is something my mother used to say," she admitted, "before the throne devoured her." A pulse of anger flared in me, sharp despite the pain. "And you think walking into an assassination attempt on purpose is how you avoid being devoured?" Her eyes flashed. "I think hiding behind walls makes a ruler into a ghost." "Or alive," I muttered. She ignored that. "You saved me without knowing my title," she said. "That is rare. Most would have calculated whether I was worth the risk." "I didn't calculate," I admitted. "I just moved." "Yes," she said, and there was something fierce in her tone now. "That is why I needed you," I grimaced. "There it is, the part I don't like." She held my gaze, unblinking. "My court whispers that humans are unpredictable," she said, "that your species cannot be trusted, that you are either saviors or monsters, and no one can tell which until it's too late." I tried to laugh and ended up wincing. "Fair. They want me to sign a treaty that would contain your kind," she continued, voice tightening. "Restrictions, registration, for the safety of the realm." My blood went cold despite the pain. And you're here because I refused, she said. The words rang louder than any station announcement. Then why the assassins, I rasped, her jaw clenched, because refusal makes enemies. I stared at her, suddenly seeing the shape of the trap. A queen who refused to cage humans, a court that feared humans, assassins drawn out in public to expose conspirators, and a human bleeding on the floor who'd shoved her out of the way without thinking, a witness, a symbol. I let out a slow breath. You used me. She didn't flinch from it. Yes, she said simply. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the pain and anger wash through me. When I opened them again, she was still there, still steady, still watching me like she'd put a bet on a storm and was waiting to see if it would break or burn. Why? I asked, voice low. Because, she said, I am tired of ruling fear. I want to rule hope. I snorted. Hope gets you killed. Her fingers tightened on my wrist, not hard, just enough to remind me she was real. Hope gets you followed, she corrected. Fear gets you obeyed. I met her eyes. I thought of Earth far away and fractured. Of humans scattered through space like sparks from a fire, surviving in places no one else wanted. Of the way aliens looked at us with suspicion, sometimes fascination, often contempt. And I thought of that corridor years ago, how she'd been young and bleeding and furious, and still she'd listened when I told her to breathe. All right, I said hoarsely. So what do you want from me now, Your Majesty? The title felt strange in my mouth, like wearing someone else's coat. She smiled faintly. I want you to stand beside me. I barked a laugh that turned into a groan. I can barely stand at all. Not today, she said. When you heal, my stomach sank again. That's not a job offer, that's a sentence. Her eyes softened. It is an invitation. To what? I asked. To be seen, she said. To be proof. To be the human who did not kneel yet still chose to protect. The guard leader returned with a sleek medical pod hovering behind him. A physician stepped out, tall, pale, with eyes like polished stone. He bowed deeply to the queen, then glanced at me with open disdain. A human, he said, as if tasting something sour. We have remedies, but save your opinion, the queen said, cold as vacuum. Save his life. The physician bowed again, tense, as you command. The medics finally moved in, applying sealant foam to my shoulder wound. The cooling gel soothed a fraction of the burn. As they worked, I stared up at the queen. Do you ever get tired? I asked quietly. She blinked. Of what? Of being that, I said, gesturing weakly at her guards, the bowed heads, the way everyone's fear orbited her like moons. For a moment, her mask cracked just slightly. Yes, she admitted, every day. And you still do it, I said. I must, she said, then her gaze sharpened. But I do not have to do it alone. The medics lifted me carefully, sliding me onto a hover stretcher. My vision swam, but I forced myself to keep my eyes open. As they carried me, I saw beings still watching from a distance, some frightened, some curious, some calculating. The rumor would spread through the station like wildfire. The queen had been here. The queen had bled. A human had saved her, twice. In the corridor of memory and on the cold floor of Carthage Gate, the same choice repeated. Not because I was brave, because I was human. They wheeled me toward the security cordon, toward the royal transport docked somewhere beyond the concourse. The queen walked beside the stretcher, unhurried, cloak discarded. Her guards flowed around her like shadow. I swallowed against the dizziness. You know, I murmured, you never actually told me your name. She glanced down at me, storm glass eyes glinting. If I tell you, she said, you will start treating me like a symbol. I already am, I muttered. No, she said softly. You are still treating me like a person. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them. Fine, keep your name, her lips curved. As you wish. We moved through a passage lined with armed guards. Doors hissed open at her approach. Systems recognized her presence like she was a code embedded in the station itself. And as we passed, every soldier, every drone, every official bowed. I didn't, not because I wanted to be defiant. Because my body was strapped to a stretcher and my shoulder felt like it had been chewed by a star. But even if I'd been standing, I wasn't sure I would have. The queen noticed. She didn't command me, she didn't punish me, she just walked beside me as if my refusal was not an insult but a familiar truth. At the transport bay, the air smelled cleaner, richer, like someone had paid extra for better oxygen. The ramp to the royal vessel extended. Its hull was matte black with faint silver markings, elegant, lethal. As they started to wheel me aboard, I gritted my teeth and forced the words out. You asked me if I knew who you were, I said. She paused at the base of the ramp and looked down at me. Yes, she said. I didn't, I admitted. Not then, not on that bench. Her eyes held mine. But I think I do now, I continued, voice rough. Not because someone bowed, not because guards showed up. Because you walked into danger to prove something and you didn't flinch when I called you trouble. Her smirk returned, full and bright for the first time since the attack. Good, she said. And for the record, I added, next time you want to test a theory, maybe don't do it where I can get shot. She laughed again, low, warm, dangerous sunlight. I will consider your complaint, she said, then softly, like a confession only the dead air of space would hear, and I will consider your presence. The ramp carried us into the ship's shadow. As the bay doors sealed behind us, the station's chaos fell away, muffled and distant. I lay back, heart pounding, body burning, and understood something with sudden clarity. I had just become a piece on a board I didn't understand. A human pawn in a royal game, only if the queen thought I would kneel quietly and be moved where she wished. She didn't know humans as well as she thought, because humans didn't survive by obeying. They survived by choosing. And if I was going to stand beside a queen, it wouldn't be because of her voice. It would be because, somewhere in the smoke of a burning corridor and the panic of a crowded concourse, she had chosen to be a person again, and I had chosen to save her. Again, the ship's engines hummed to life, deep and steady, like a heartbeat made of metal. The queen walked ahead into the corridor of her own making, guards parting for her like water. Before she disappeared around the bend, she looked back once. Just once. And her eyes said what her voice did not. This is where the story starts.